About 7 years ago, I went to Ghana, West Africa, with my mom. She is a Ghanaian, and I am Black British, but we were visiting our homelands together. At the time I was 14, but my childhood was not an easy one, so I was, and still am, as sharp as a bullet. My mom owns a small hotel business abroad, about 5 rooms, and she had hired her cousin, my distant cousin I think, to take care of the business when we weren't around. She took him out of a village that had no electricity or gas, and he had been the caretaker of my mom's business for as long as I could remember at the time, whilst my mom and I are in London. Now I know that sounds very nice of my mom, but she can be a ruthless woman. She is the source of my greatest pain and my greatest love, but she can be a little brutish and cold, but she will never let anyone fuck with her. She's gone through some in Ghana, and her journey to get to London illegally was quite the James Bond story. But anyway, onwards. We found out that he had been stealing money from her, so that was the purpose of our flight. We surprised him at the hotel by just turning up randomly. The next day, my mom sacked him, which means he would have to pack his things and go back to a very poor mud hut in his village. Akwasi has a wife and 3 kids, all of whom are in poverty too. When this happened, I wasn't at the hotel. I was in the city's center in Accra, in a very populated market with my mom's friend. However, for some reason, as I was walking about, a sudden sense of terror washed all over me. I'm 21 years old now, and since I am a people person, talkative, social, etc., but has also gone through some shit, I am good at reading people, and I follow my gut because of these things. I told my mom's friend that we should go back to the hotel. I was on autopilot when my body just started moving on its own, and suddenly I was sprinting back to the hotel, and he kept telling me to wait as we ran. When I got there, the woman staying in the hotel was standing outside crying, and she looked at me and hissed very low, "Run, or he will kill you!" Both me and my mom's friend are like, what the fuck? When I arrived, the back entrance to the small hotel was wide open. I bolted into the corridor and found my cousin standing outside a locked room with a machete and a passport screaming at the top of his lungs. I immediately hid behind the corner so he couldn't see me, and in my language he said, "I'll fucking cut you like a butcher with his meat, and you and your daughter. This is my building now." My mom's friend stares, freezes up, and then bolts out of the door of the hotel. The way the hotel is set up, you can enter the main gate and take a left to get to the small car park, or just come through the car park, where you can see into the windows of one of some of the rooms. Because of the high rates of armed robbery in Ghana, like full-on guns, knives, and gangs bursting into your house, stealing your shit and killing you in cold blood, loads of houses have iron railings around their windows to prohibit entry, but it also prohibits exits. I ran back outside and dragged a chair from nearby, next to the window of the room that was locked, and my mom was crying behind the door, shaking. I have never seen her like that in my life. She saw me, and she froze, and then vomited on the floor. I mouthed to her that I will rescue her, and she shook her head and told me to run. Akwasi, crazy machete man, rounded the corner. I screamed and ran the other way. He chased me, but there was a distance between us, so I managed to crawl under the huge car gates and tell my neighbors. They kind of already knew because my mom's friend who took me to the market had already told them. They then went and called the chief of the area. In about 3 minutes, over 10 huge fucking men are following me and my mom's friend to the hotel. My mom is really kind when she wants to be, and it helped these guys out by bailing them out of poverty. They disarmed my uncle and beat the shit out of him. I then found out that he had been holding my mom's passport in an attempt to stop her from leaving the country. My mom comes out of the bathroom and she's really shaken up. My adrenaline crashes when she's in safe hands, and I'm shaking incredibly badly. We hold a group meeting about my cousin with my close neighborhood members in the hotel, but I sit outside because I'm too scared to sit indoors with my cousin Akwasi. Then my mom calls me inside, but when I go in, Akwasi is absurdly nice to me. I kind of ignore him because I'm incredibly scared. He makes me and my mom a mug of hot tea and chocolate as an apology for losing it earlier. The other neighborhood members are drinking some tea too. I glance at my mom, who is blowing the top of the tea because it's really hot. Then I stare at my mug, and for some reason, staring at the cup of hot chocolate made my blood run cold. I asked my mom who made the tea, and she says Akwasi, but she agreed not to fire him due to his circumstances. At that time, I chided myself for being paranoid, but I'm so glad I followed my gut. I refuse to drink it. It is 2 p.m. and it's dry season in Ghana. It's so hot that it would be stupid to drink hot chocolate at this time. The drink looks fine, but something seems off. Its color is slightly gray. So I lean over to smell it, and it doesn't smell bad, but it smells chemically, like a strong mosquito repellent of some kind. My mom can't smell it because she's been crying, so her nasal passage is all blocked up. She picks up the mug to have a sip, and I tell her that mine smells weird. I give it to one of the elders of the neighborhood to smell, and they agree it smells quite sharp. She puts the cup back down before she can have a sip, and suddenly the cup's rim is black as fuck. When my mom asks Akwasi what's in the cup, he doesn't even miss a beat. He doesn't hesitate to tell her it's loaded with rat poisoning. We keep a bag of it behind the fridge just in case we have an infestation or something. At this point, my whole body feels like molten lava. I have never, and I will never feel that kind of blinding hot white rage in my life ever again. I remember launching myself at Akwasi, who is over double my age. I remember digging my fingers into his eye sockets and sinking them as hard as I could until I drew blood. I understand why people can be blinded by anger. When I came conscious of my actions, I was being hugged tightly by a tall, black, hulky man and hyperventilating like crazy. My stomach was scratched, and the bruises on the side of my face were huge. Akwasi says that he wants to commit suicide an hour and a half later, and my mom gladly hands him both cups of rat-poisoning beverages and tells him to down them both and do the whole world a favor. A little background. My mom owns a boutique which has been going strong for 5 years now. Tonight was her anniversary party, which was held at the store. Quite a few of her friends and employees were there, just having a good time. Being a 17-year-old male, I didn't want to spend all day in a boutique. I spent the day with some friends and left just as it began to get dark. I decided to stop by the shop party and say hi to my mom and her friends. On the way over, I noticed it was a full moon. That turns out to be quite the coincidence, since everyone says full moons bring out the weirdos. I enter the store, and everything's going great. My mom's laughing with her friends. One of my buddies is actually there playing guitar for them. His dad is there as well, who I also get along with. I began talking to my mom's friends, who were asking me all the usual questions that friends of parents ask. I was actually having a pretty good time. Then a large man, looked to be in his 20s, came in. He was well dressed, clean cut, and appeared to be in a good mood. My first thought was he's in here to buy something for a girlfriend. He goes up to a group of my mom's friends and casually asks, "Are there any demons in here?" Everyone looks at him, obviously puzzled. "What?" someone asks. A little louder, he says, "I'm looking for demons. Are you demons?" My mom and a couple of her friends approached him, but I couldn't fully hear what they were saying. In a smart-ass tone, the man yells, "Should I call you demons or should I call you bitches?" That's when my mom and her group snap back, demanding he leave. "Are you kicking me out? Am I not welcome here?" He keeps repeating those questions. My mom didn't back down. She just kept looking straight up into the guy's eyes. Adrenaline kicked in. I started fearing for my mom's safety. I was carrying my pocket knife, and somehow my brain decided it was too short to do any real damage. At this point, I'm already moving towards them. On my way, I notice a large liquor bottle, which I instinctively arm myself with. I'm coming up on his side, but one of my mom's friends, Amy, is between us. I reach my arm around her and try to move her out of the way. She doesn't budge and starts trying to calm me down. This man is still going at it with my mom, calling her a bitch and threatening her. He kept saying things like, "I'm gonna have to come back here and finish this." Even though Amy is still between us, I have a clear shot at the guy. The bottle was very round and didn't have a long enough neck to use as a handle, so I cocked it back best I could, about to slam it on his head. And then someone yells, "Oh my God, Joey's gonna hit him!" I freeze. He turns and faces my direction, but strangely not directly at me. "Who's Joey? I want to see Joey." He repeated those questions several times. Then my mom starts calling out for me to come over, though there was no fear in her voice. I prepared my arm for a second attempt at a strike, but several of my mom's friends got in between us. Somehow Barbara, one of my mom's friends, started calmly talking to the guy. They started talking about Jesus, and he yells, "Jesus is a girl." Barbara responded with, "Okay, sorry. God bless you." He seemed to get annoyed and said, "It's Jehovah. Jehovah bless me." "Okay, sorry. Jehovah bless you." "I am Jehovah." She got him to walk out of the store with her. Adrenaline and panic filled me, and I tried to follow them, since I was still intent on smashing the bottle over his head. But Barbara turned around and told me to stay inside, so I did. I stood there and looked out the glass door as she talked him down. Eventually they hugged, and he walked off into the night. My mom called the area security guard, and they came to the shop almost instantly. We told him what happened, and he went out and did a quick search for him. He didn't find him. He told us, "All the weird ones come out this time of year." That's when I mentioned the full moon. After that, everything went back to normal. Truth be told, I was pretty shaken up, and still am, obviously. I found a hammer under the counter and sat by the door the rest of the night. Whenever one of the women would leave, I'd escort them out to their car and make sure they left safe. I keep going over what happened in my mind, even though I know the situation ended perfectly. No one hurt, and there was no physical contact. I take martial arts, but I'm pretty lightweight. This guy was a lot bigger than me, so I know it's stupid of me to have wanted to have initiated a fight with him. It's just hard hearing someone call your mom a bitch and threaten her right in front of you. I'm just glad I was there to help. The weird thing was, he appeared perfectly sober. I'm almost positive that he has a mental illness and was off his meds. I volunteered to go up to the shop during the evenings and sit with whoever's working. I guess I'll update if anything else happens, though I hope it doesn't. I was a sophomore in high school, and I had recently thrown my rebellious stage into full throttle, trying every drug available to me. The one drug I've never tried is meth, but as life would ironically have it, I started dating this meth addict named Richard. This story isn't so much about him as it is about his dealer, TJ. My boyfriend was a tiny, short guy who fortunately never laid a hand on me. His dealer, on the other hand, was a massive guy. He stood 6'3" and must have weighed 300 pounds. He had a machete he kept in his boot at all times, and once I saw him knock a guy out for simply glancing at his house. He is a schizophrenic meth addict and a dealer. Also, he lived directly across the street from me. About 6 months into my relationship with Richard, I ended it and told my parents everything. They were concerned, of course, but I was still in a lot of trouble. A few weeks after we'd broken up, I get a Skype video call request from him. I stupidly accept it, and he cut right to the chase, telling me that TJ's cousin had recently been arrested and somehow their meth-addicted brains believed I was the cause of this, despite never having met his cousin. I told Richard to try to talk some sense into TJ, but all Richard said was, "I'm just trying to warn you. He's coming," and ended the Skype call. Because I was a stupid teenager, I didn't report this to the police and didn't tell my parents until much later in life. I think my reasoning at the time was that I was using a lot of drugs myself and was afraid I would get in trouble as well. After the night of the Skype call, I saw TJ everywhere. He was watching my house. He would show up at the park near my school where I'd smoke, and I'd see him standing across the street from my bus stop. He never said anything or made any moves. He just stared at me. This continued on for months, ramping up my anxiety and making it impossible for me to sleep. I started falling asleep in class and finding riskier places to smoke near campus to stay away from him. It was total agony, knowing that something horrible was coming, but I was still too dumb to do anything about it. Luckily, TJ got busted after 3 months of watching me because some ladies suspected he was making meth in his house. He's still in jail from what I know, and I never saw Richard again after that Skype call. I hope I never have to see him again, and I would be smart enough now to contact the police if I do. About 10 years ago, I studied abroad. I had few friends in this new country and was glad to find a place to live with some cool people my own age. I started hanging with this crew, which became my friends, and we used to smoke a lot of weed. Things were sweet. There was this one friend of my roommates, Frank, that came over to our place from time to time. I thought it was odd because he was like twice everybody's age. He was very intense as a person and made me feel slightly uncomfortable. The first time I met him, he seemed extremely suspicious of me and would ask me all kinds of questions to suss me out. But he had a good sense of humor and would always crack great jokes. In a way, he was kind of charming, and my roommates seemed to love him. Also, he always brought pizza. I asked one of my friends what the deal was with this guy, and he was like, "Oh, you don't know? Last year he found his girlfriend and her siblings murdered in their flat. he's under investigation. But he didn't do it. I was taken aback by this. How could they really know he didn't do it? And why did they want to hang around with a potential psycho? I gave it the benefit of the doubt, but I certainly saw Frank in a new light now. Time went on, and Frank came by our place almost daily. He was very clever and sly, manipulative. I got to know more about his background. He used to be in a gang when he was my age. He had been in prison for most of the time in between then and now for violence. This didn't help me in trusting him. I couldn't believe how naive my roommates were to trust this man. Then police went out and declared him a suspect. By now, this had become the biggest investigation ever in that particular area. He was interrogated, but released for lack of evidence. Back home at our place, he would sit and talk about how he was a victim of a conspiracy, and all of my friends would nod and believe him. I felt crazy for being the only one who didn't believe it. He must have sensed it, because he took me outside and asked me if I believed him one time. I said, yeah, sure I did, because by now I was starting to get really afraid of him. I asked him about the murders, where he told me his version of the events, where, according to him, he found the bodies. It was gruesome, but I still had doubts, and to my horror, he would at another time crack jokes about the whole thing. Who in their right mind would joke about that? In my mind, only a complete psychopath. I started researching what a psychopath actually is, and learned that this guy fit every classical definition. I freaked out, because I couldn't figure out what he really wanted from us. I started getting paranoid, and started believing that he actually planned on killing me and my roommates. I couldn't tell this to my roommates, because they were fully blinded by this guy's charades and trusted him. At one point I started sleeping with a knife in my bed. That's how scared I was that he was going to come and murder us like he murdered those poor souls. This was a horrible time for me. On top of that, police had been tipped off about the relatively large amounts of weed being kept in the house and started raiding the place. 2 of my roommates were busted, and this marked the breakup of our collective. The day I moved out, Frank helped me with my stuff and looked at me, menacingly as I always found him. "You're all right," he said. "I actually planned on killing you, but you're all right." I kid you not. He told me this. The others would laugh it off as a joke, but I saw it very differently. I was glad to leave after hanging out with this murderer on and off for 1.5 years. Frank would be arrested shortly later, starting a huge trial that lasted several years. I found some new friends and got back to some normality in my life. That's when I realized how fucked up the whole situation was. I had been isolated with all of this and had no one else to go to. A year later, I was back in my home country and followed the trial. All the craziness that surfaced about this man during the trial would convince me that I was probably right all along. He was proper mental and was convicted of 4 life sentences. He will never be a free man again. About 7 years ago, I went to Ghana, West Africa, with my mom. She is a Ghanaian, and I am Black British, but we were visiting our homelands together. At the time I was 14, but my childhood was not an easy one, so I was, and still am, as sharp as a bullet. My mom owns a small hotel business abroad, about 5 rooms, and she had hired her cousin, my distant cousin I think, to take care of the business when we weren't around. She took him out of a village that had no electricity or gas, and he had been the caretaker of my mom's business for as long as I could remember at the time, whilst my mom and I are in London. Now I know that sounds very nice of my mom, but she can be a ruthless woman. She is the source of my greatest pain and my greatest love, but she can be a little brutish and cold, but she will never let anyone fuck with her. She's gone through some in Ghana, and her journey to get to London illegally was quite the James Bond story. But anyway, onwards. We found out that he had been stealing money from her, so that was the purpose of our flight. We surprised him. When I arrived, the back entrance to the small hotel was wide open. I bolted into the corridor and found my cousin standing outside a locked room with a machete and a passport screaming at the top of his lungs. I immediately hid behind the corner so he couldn't see me, and in my language he said, "I'll fucking cut you like a butcher with his meat, and you and your daughter. This is my building now." My mom's friend stares, freezes up, and then bolts out of the door of the hotel. The way the hotel is set up, you can enter the main gate and take a left to get to the small at the hotel by just turning up randomly. The next day, my mom sacked him, which means he would have to pack his things and go back to a very poor mud hut in his village. Akwasi has a wife and 3 kids, all of whom are in poverty too. When this happened, I wasn't at the hotel. I was in the city's center in Accra, in a very populated market with my mom's friend. However, for some reason, as I was walking about, a sudden sense of terror washed all over me. I'm 21 years old now, and since I am a people person, talkative, social, etc., but has also gone through some shit, I am good at reading people, and I follow my gut because of these things. I told my mom's friend that we should go back to the hotel. I was on autopilot when my body just started moving on its own, and suddenly I was sprinting back to the hotel, and he kept telling me to wait as we ran. When I got there, the woman staying in the hotel was standing outside crying, and she looked at me and hissed very low, "Run, or he will kill you!" Both me and my mom's friend are like, what the fuck?